Another NFL season is in the books with the Buccaneers raising the Lombardi Trophy. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Penn State Sports Night. I'm Destiny Sanchez here with Logan Bourandas and JC Colavita with the NFL Year in Review. Tonight, we are going to be recapping the highs and lows of the 2020 NFL season. There were many groundbreaking moments during this season. I'll start with you, JC. What were some of the big stories that stood out to you this year?
Well, obviously, going into this season, we had Tom Brady leaving the New England Patriots after 20 years and heading down to Tampa Bay. And so people were wondering, is he still the GOAT? Is he going to be good without Bill Belichick? And obviously, Super Bowl Sunday, we were all proven wrong, where he took this Bucs team as a 5 seed coming out of the NFC, and he just steamrolled through these teams. And he proved that he is undoubtedly the greatest quarterback of all time. To make it better, they even won in their home stadium. You can't make this stuff up. So another thing that stood out to me was when the Jets and the Jaguars were seemingly tanking for Trevor Lawrence. Like one of the biggest moments was when they almost lost the game on purpose in Week 13 against the Raiders when Lamar Jackson, the cornerback, got beat deep for 46-yard touchdown by Henry Ruggs, and that made them 0-12 at that point. And then they ended up winning 2 games, and the Jets fans were pretty outraged by that. But the Jaguars ultimately took the crown at 1-15, and they seemingly were starting Mike Glennon over Gardner Minshew, even after Minshew showed that he was better, just to get that number 1 pick. And the last thing that I thought was really interesting about this season was how Josh Allen just emerged as an MVP candidate seemingly out of nowhere. His stats were crazy from last year to this year. He had 20 touchdowns last year to 37 this year, and his completion percentage improved by 10 points. And he's no longer that raw quarterback from Wyoming. He is now a seasoned young veteran that can take Buffalo to new heights. He made them relevant again, and I can see them being tops in the AFC East for years to come.
Yeah, so a few stories I have. The Pittsburgh Steelers were one of the hottest teams at the start of the NFL season. They started out the year 11-0, but they hadn't beat some really good teams. And we saw some storylines break out throughout the season where wide receiver Juju Smith-Schuster was dancing pregame on these NFL logos, and a lot of people were upset by that. And it got to a point late in the season against the Bengals in a primetime game where he danced midfield on the logo, and then he gets clapped by one of the cornerbacks, Von Bell, and he fumbles the ball, kind of stops him from doing that. But the Steelers, they went from 11-0 to 12-4 after they played teams like Washington, Buffalo, and Cleveland, and they lost to Cleveland twice and lost to them in the wild card game that kind of ended their season. But just the fall from grace after an 11-0 start to where they are right now should make for a very interesting offseason. And you had the Atlanta Falcons, meanwhile. They continued their choking history where they just seemingly blow big games with this core of Matt Ryan and Dan Quinn, and that offense there kind of started at that Super Bowl they were in a couple of years ago. But this year was worse. They blew some of the worst games you can blow in some of the weirdest ways possible. And it started really early on in the season where in week 2, the Dallas Cowboys recovered a non-side kick late in that game, and they ended up kicking a field goal last second to win that game. The very next week, Nick Foles for the Chicago Bears came in replacement for Mitch Trubisky, and he came in to score 20 unanswered points for the Bears to help win that game. In week 7, Todd Gurley, in true Devin Ford Penn State fashion, he scored a touchdown when he wasn't trying to, and that gave the Lions enough time to score a last-second touchdown from Matt Stafford, T.J. Hawkinson. And finally, this one was already late in the season, but the Tampa Bay Buccaneers came back from 17-0 deficit late in that game, and that already happened with Dan Quinn being fired, and the Falcons already set in stone as one of the worst teams in the NFL this season. And then finally, one of the more entertaining stories of the season with Trace McSorley, the quarterback formerly at Penn State, but with the Ravens, where he just became a TikTok sensation overnight. And that fame grew when he came into a game late in December against the Steelers, and he threw a touchdown, first of his career, to Hollywood Brown. And that hype seemingly ended in the game against the Cleveland Browns, where he got hurt late in that game in relief for Lamar Jackson. And that set up another good moment in the season with Lamar Jackson late in that Browns game. But just the way a backup quarterback seemingly rose to fame out of nowhere, just a crazy story overall.
To say that this year's season was unusual would be an understatement. The NFL faced some obstacles throughout the season due to many injuries and the struggle facing all sports today, the coronavirus pandemic. How have setbacks like COVID and injuries impacted the season?
Well, I think with this virus, there are a lot of certain opportunities that just came up randomly. Like the Denver Broncos, probably the more famous one, they had to play a game without a quarterback. Former practice squad wide receiver Kendall Hinton, he had to fill in a quarterback role just with days of practice, and it didn't really do any good for the Broncos. He only completed one pass in that game, and he threw 9 passes. But the Broncos, they lost to a Saints team, 31-3. And this happened another time in the season where the Cleveland Browns, they played a game without any wide receivers on their roster, and they ended up losing that one to the New York Jets, where their leading receiver was Austin Hooper, who's their tight end at the time. And there were some injuries at some point in the season that brought a lot of interesting circumstances throughout. In week 2 of the season, Chargers quarterback Tyrod Taylor, he got an injury where he punctured his lung via the team doctors right before kickoff of this week 2 game. Taylor had won the Chargers' last game against the Bengals. They were 1-0. Things were looking good. But this injury just brought about the rise of rookie quarterback Justin Herbert, and he would go on to win Rookie of the Year. We saw another quarterback injury where Taysom Hill, he came in to fill a role left by Drew Brees after Drew Brees got hurt. And Taysom Hill, he ended up filling a huge role for that Saints offense. He went 3-1, and I think there was a lot of controversy on whether or not he should be starting, where last year when Drew Brees got hurt, we saw Teddy Bridgewater come in, fill in a great role, and this team had Jameis Winston. He was signed to be the backup quarterback, and Sean Payton, the head coach, went with Taysom Hill instead. And another quarterback scenario, this happened late in the season during the playoffs, where Patrick Mahomes was leading the Chiefs to a win against the Cleveland Browns in the playoffs, and he gets a concussion, and now you have this journeyman quarterback, formerly a Dolphin, formerly a Jaguar, played college in Michigan, Chad Henne. He had to close out this playoff game after not playing in so long, and he did so in one of the craziest last plays you'll ever see, with him going forward on 4th and inches in a playoff game, completing that pass to Tyreek Hill and just stealing the win for the Chiefs.
I agree with you, Logan. There were a lot of influential injuries throughout this season. I think because of COVID and the loss of OTAs and a proper preseason and all that preparation, the players weren't used to getting hit. So you saw big names out early, like Saquon Barkley, ACL tear week 2, Nick Bosa, defensive rookie of the year in 2019, same injury. Like that was huge for those teams. There were big losses. Like San Francisco got hit huge. They got hit much harder than a lot of other teams. They lost their quarterback, Jimmy Garoppolo, to an ankle injury, and they lost George Kittle for a couple of weeks to a foot injury. And that just hindered their season after winning the NFC last year. Something that I really thought was unfortunate was how Joe Burrow, the number 1 overall pick in the 2020 draft, he was unfortunately had a terrible offensive line, and he got a bad ACL injury. It was worse than what we thought it was originally, and we got to see how he comes back. I hope he comes back, because I think Joe Burrow can be a great quarterback in the future, but we'll see. But another quarterback that really had a lot riding on this season, Dak Prescott of the Cowboys, he had a terrible ankle injury about midway through the season, and the Cowboys are looking to franchise tag him once again, but he was set up to get a huge payday, and I really don't know if that's going to happen after this injury, because first of all, Jerry Jones, not exactly great about giving players their due, but we'll see how he fares next season, if he will even play with the Cowboys under that franchise tag.
And to wrap up this year's NFL Year in Review, what were some of your personal favorite moments from the season?
Well, mine had to be Ryan Fitzpatrick, Fitzmagic. He started the first 6 games for the Miami Dolphins, who had a great year this year despite not making the playoffs. He started them off 3-3. He had a great performance against the Jets in his last starting game. He was Brian Flores unceremoniously benched him in week 7 for Tua Tagovailoa, their top 5 pick. And Tua did okay. He's serviceable for his rookie year, but a lot of people thought that Fitzpatrick deserved to stay in. But in a couple of games, he came in when Tua was struggling. Fitzpatrick came in, and in one of the games they lost, but he did well. Now, in week 16 against the Raiders, he had a comeback for the ages. So they started calling him the closer. So he comes in with about 10 minutes remaining in the fourth quarter. He leads 2 touchdown drives, and I believe it was 3. There was 3 scoring drives. So he comes in, and there's 19 seconds to go. They're down by 2. Ryan Fitzpatrick makes this miracle throw while there's a face mask on the play. He makes this miracle throw, no-look throw that would make Patrick Mahomes jealous. He sets up that game-winning field goal, and he's just a feel-good story. Everybody loves Ryan Fitzpatrick, and for him to go out that way, if this was his last final season, was a great way to go out.
I think mine would probably have to be just the entire Nickelodeon game that featured a wild card matchup between the Chicago Bears and the New Orleans Saints that for the first time ever would be broadcasted on Nickelodeon, which is a network pretty much for kids. And the game pretty much featured towards that younger audience. They would feature slime cams, and at the end of the game, there would be an MVP, which was the Nickelodeon Valuable Player. And that, funnily enough, went to the losing quarterback, Mitch Trubisky. And social media had a field day after that happened. And I think that was just one of the funniest things we've seen all season. And the game even had an ending where the final play was a touchdown pass to Jimmy Graham, who made a nice one-handed catch to get in the end zone. That was the first time the Bears had scored all game. And at the end of that play, he was just running off the field. I think he was just done. And that could have been easily Jimmy Graham's last play of his career. We don't know about that yet. But overall, just an entertaining game. I thought the broadcast was one of the more entertaining ones we've seen all season, just trying to get that out there to the younger audience. And it was just interesting to watch a different broadcast.
Although this NFL season changed in many ways, America was still able to see some of their favorite teams and players play. That will do it for this edition of Penn State Sports Night. For Logan Bourandas and JC Colavita, I'm Destiny Sanchez, and we'll see you next week.
Thank you for watching this edition of Penn State Sports Night. If you're a fan of our content, please be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel for more clips. Also, follow us on Twitter at PSSN TV and on Instagram at PSU Sports Night to keep up with all the action. For all my colleagues, we are Penn State Sports Night.